So this afternoon we're kicking off our next session with our second keynote speaker, who is Professor Amy Tsui, who is Pro-Vice-Chancellor and Vice President for Teaching and Learning in the University of Hong Kong. And in that role she supports the Vice-Chancellor in setting direction and policy for the university's undergraduate curriculum reform, as well as overseeing the quality assurance of curricula and promoting teaching excellence at the university. And in this role, Amy has been at the forefront of the design and implementation of what is massive, major curriculum reform at the University of Hong Kong. Amy is a well-known international speaker on the topics of student learning, curricular reform and global trends in higher education. Her presence here and her presentation today has particular resonance for us in Scotland, because as the Scottish higher education sector prepares to address the implementations of our new curricular reform in the primary and secondary school sector, the recent experience of Hong Kong's public universities in dealing with the consequences of reform in their secondary education is particularly apposite. Just recently, Hong Kong universities moved from a 3-year to a 4-year undergraduate curriculum, as I said, in response to that significant reform in the secondary school curriculum. I had a little more notes about what happened, but I've just decided not to talk about them because Amy's going to tell us everything that happened. So she's going to describe what is effectively an 8-year journey of undergraduate education reform at the University of Hong Kong. The title of her talk is Reimagining Undergraduate Education. Would you please welcome Professor Amy Tsui?
It's a great honor to be here. I thought I can't see you because of the lights. It was really a great honor to be here amongst this group of very distinguished education reformers and curriculum developers, as well as people in charge of quality of teaching and learning in universities. I particularly want to thank Professor Bill Harvey, the director of the Scottish QAA, for inviting me. And also, I think it was about a year ago, I got a call from Dr. Christine McPherson, who is the assistant director of the Scottish QAA, spending about 45 minutes or so on the phone, briefing me about this conference, the expectations, and so forth. And I must say, this is the first time I've ever received briefing of this kind when I was invited to give a keynote speech. And this just tells you how seriously the conference organizers have taken this conference. I also want to thank Professor Frank Coton. I can't see him, but I know he's somewhere in the audience, who's chairman of the organizing committee. It must be a lot of very, very hard work in bringing together such a big group and a distinguished group of participants. I also owe a very sincere thanks to Andrea, because when I first took on the position as a Pro-Vice-Chancellor, one of the first universities I visited was University of Glasgow, and at the time I asked around and I said, you know, where can I learn good practices, best practices from universities in the UK? And of course Andrea's name came up, and I still remember I spent a morning at the university, and one thing that she said to me, which I still remember to this day, is that we were talking about the student responses to surveys, and she said, if you want to get a high enough response rate from your students, you must tell them what they have filled in. You must brief them on the results and what you're going to do with those results. And this, I have actually done that in the university. I've also asked the faculties to do that as well, and it really worked, Andrea. I'm going to just very briefly outline the talk today. I won't be able to spend a lot of time on the secondary scene. I'll be mainly talking about what's been happening at the University of Hong Kong with just some background information about secondary education. But if you're interested, of course, I can share my views about what's happening in schools over coffee break. So I'll start off with a higher education landscape, which to me, it's a landscape which is changing so fast. Even when I started it 8 years ago and now, I'm witnessing changes, and I feel that all the time I have to keep myself up to date with what's going on and asking myself, are we actually catching up with what's happening worldwide? Then I'm going to talk about the curriculum reform at the university, focusing on goal setting, operationalization, and the challenges. And I'll leave about 5 minutes in a presentation just to share with you some of my personal reflections in leading and managing curriculum reform at my university. In the mid-1990s, when the internet took off, there was in the global discourse, there's a lot of talk about the intensity of information explosion, the rapid generation of knowledge, and we're all saying we're now into the information age. And there's a lot of talk about the economy being a knowledge economy. So universities worldwide and governments worldwide have been trying to respond to this knowledge economy and asking questions about how we could prepare our graduates for this knowledge economy. So just a very brief overview of what's happening worldwide. We'll see, I'm not just going to go through that, but just this slide will show how major review reports have been coming out in these various countries. In Europe, we have the Bologna process, and in UK, these higher education reform reports, and in Scotland, you have the 3 phases of higher education review coming out. And of course, in China, in 1998, there was this 211 project where they want to establish 100 world-class universities, and the same thing is happening in Hong Kong and Australia. So the common challenges that the universities were trying to address were employers are getting more and more dissatisfied with their graduates, and that's worldwide. Students are much more vocationally focused than before, but then the ironic thing is that they change jobs more frequently than ever before. So in US, there was a survey which says that young people between the age of 18 to 44 change jobs 11 times. So what are you going to do? How are you going to prepare these graduates? There's a lot of keen competition for students and also for staff, and yet at the same time, governments are cutting education budgets. So there are common initiatives amongst these higher education institutions worldwide, and these are the proposals which I thought were common. We're looking at curriculum structure. How do we standardize it? And how can credits be portable? For example, in the Bologna process, this is what they've been looking at. In China, the same thing is happening. How can the credits gained in one university be transferred to another university? The curriculum content, there's a lot of talk about broadening, and that early specialization in the English higher education system has been questioned. There's a lot of emphasis on generic skills and lifelong learning, and breaking down the barrier between universities and the community. and also, of course, the international outlook, international experience, particularly with international ranking. There's now a lot of emphasis on internationalization. Now, whether this is going to lead to produce students with global outlook is highly questionable, but we won't go into that. However, while all of this discourse is going on, Alan Greenspan, in 1997, in a talk that he was giving to University of Connecticut, he pointed out that, in fact, we have gone beyond the information age. He said that the growth of the conceptual component of output, because of all the outsourcing, the abundance in production, it's no longer sufficient to have graduates who have the technical know-how. They have to have the ability to create, to analyze, to transform information, and to interact effectively. So what he was saying then, was that we've moved from knowledge economy to conceptual economy. And following that, there's a lot of discussion about the emergence of a different age. So here we have the left brain and the right brain. So before the turn of the century, it's dominated by people who are very good with the left brain. Those are the computer guys who's got a lot of skills in logical thinking, in reasoning, and so forth. But the discourse has now been shifted to say that, in fact, it is the right brain that is very, very important. The right brain, I think the picture will tell you, has to do with creativity, has to do with imagination. And you must have come across this book by Daniel Pink, which came out in 2005 and has now been translated into 34 languages, which says that why is it that right-brainers will rule the future? And he talks about how important it is to have a different kind of person for the future generation. These are people who are creators, empathizers, people who are able to get into the shoes of other people and be able to think from their perspective. We need pattern recognizers and meaning makers. So what he's saying here, that we have actually moved out of the information age and we're into a conceptual age. So in the conceptual age, there's a lot of talk about the importance of innovation and creativity. And here I'd like to quote from Steve Jobs, who I thought made a wonderful statement here when he talks about innovation, about the importance of crossing boundaries, that very often the most innovative things is at the intersection of boundaries. So he was saying that technology alone is not enough. It has to be married with liberal arts, with the humanities, and they will yield results that make our hearts sing. So, echoing what all of this discourse is a very recent book by John Seeley Brown, whose work I really admire, where he talked about a new culture of learning. And he is saying here that it is no longer sufficient to teach skills, not even learning how to learn. What we really need are mindsets, dispositions, people with passion, people with imagination. And we need to pay attention to the arc of life learning, meaning, in other words, the kind of learning that takes place in everyday life, the kind of activities that is embedded in our daily life. This is where we learn and we grow. So it is against this backdrop that the curriculum reform in Hong Kong progressed. We started in the year 2000, where the government published this document, Learning for Life and Learning Through Life, where it proposed that there should be a radical change in the education system by changing secondary education from 5+2 to 3+3, so that the 40% of students who are really just studying for the sake of going to university will have a coherent education for 6 years, and it caters for 100% of the student population. There's a new secondary school curriculum from S4 to S6, and there's a new examination, which has moved away from non-referenced assessment to standards referenced assessment, and all universities in Hong Kong has to change from 3 years to 4 years. So last summer this time, the whole territory was, you can imagine, that was the year when the old system finishes and the new secondary school system also finished. Then that we take a double cohort into universities. That's the time when everybody's having crisis management meetings all over. And we are now at the end of the first year of implementation, and thank God, I think there were no major crises. There were some minor ones, but not major ones. So in the new secondary curriculum, basically what has happened was that there were 4 core subjects, literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking. And then there are electives for students to choose from, and the aim is to broaden the knowledge base, to cater for student choice, and there's other learning experiences. Just very briefly, of course, as in everywhere in the world, there are many, many complaints from schools, from parents, and so forth. But I think what this has done to our students, looking at students who entered the university this year, they are much more, they have broader interests, they are more interactive, more willing to offer their views, more willing to participate in discussions, and so forth. So I think that despite there are some teething problems here and there, I think by and large this reform in the secondary schools is going in the right direction. So when we were tasked to look at what we should do for undergraduate curriculum, and I was given the task in 2005. I wasn't vice president then. I was seconded to the Vice-Chancellor's office to spend 50% of my time on curriculum reform. You can imagine it's 250% of my time and not 50% of my time on that. So the first thing that I did was I went around to the faculties and asked the professors, and I said, what would you like to do if we have 1 extra year? And this is what the kind of response that I've got from some professors. Okay. I then went around, and there are also other professors who said this to me. And you know that the one, the person who said, I want my students to treat patients as human beings, that is actually from a chair professor in medicine. I couldn't find his picture, so I had to make do with another picture. Okay. This is what the employers were telling us. Okay. What is very interesting was the guy who says, I want graduates who can tell me an interesting novel they have read, was an engineer. And the one who says, I want graduates who can identify what the problem is, was also an engineer. He said, you know, engineers thought that they were very good at solving problems. You know, but in fact, that's not enough. I want them to tell me what the problem was. Okay. And so with these responses from professors, we thought that what we really needed was not just that 1 extra year. What we needed was to transform the entire student learning experience. But how do we do that? The first thing that I felt was very, very important is to set the goals. What are the goals? What are the aims of university education? So we spent 2 years debating that, and we agreed on 6 educational aims, where I just want to highlight 2 or 3 of them. The first one about critical intellectual inquiry is very, very important, and that I will explain in a minute how we realize that in the curriculum. Tackling novel situations and ill-defined problem this aim generated a lot of discussion. The staff were telling me, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean by ill-defined problems? Problems are problems. Another comment was that our students couldn't even solve a problem. What do you mean solve ill-defined problems? Okay, what do you mean by tackling novel situation? What is a novel situation? And so on. Once we've agreed on that, then you have to operationalize it. The questions from teachers are saying, well, it's motherhood and apple pie. How do we do that? How can they be realized? How do we teach them? How can values and dispositions be assessed? You can't do that. So the response to that was that in response to these questions, I raised a number of questions for myself and also for my committee. The first question, what do we need to do to generate a university-wide discussion? What are the key ideas and concepts in the whole reform process? Do we, the university as a community, do we have a common language to talk about what we want to do? And how do we know whether things are working? So in response to the first question, I felt that it was very important that we have a very simple conceptual framework which is accessible to everybody, which will show them where we can start. And of course, lying at the center of all of this is the educational aims. And in understanding these aims, we have to look at the bigger context. And we also have to think about what does a curriculum mean? So a curriculum may be very meaningful to people who are in faculties of education, for example, or who are working in centers of teaching and learning, or who have been engaged in teaching and learning, but not the university as a whole. So we have to, I remember when I first started this reform, I asked people about the curriculum, and they didn't know what I was talking about. They said, are you asking me the courses that I'm teaching? I don't know what a curriculum is. So we really need the common language to talk about that. So this is a simple enough framework that people know where to locate the issues and the questions that they were asking. But what is very important in addition to this are the key concepts and ideas. And I thought that these are very, very important. First of all is our conception of knowledge. Is knowledge transmitted or is knowledge constructed? What is the theory of learning that underlies what we're doing? So as I move on this presentation, I'll illustrate what I mean by theory of learning. So in terms of the conception of the curriculum, we start off by showing what is the common conception of curriculum that is usually thought in terms of the formal curriculum, classroom learning, which is systematic, organized, explicit, decontextualized, assessed, and teacher-driven. All the rest is informal, it's optional. You do it when you have time, if you like, and you don't have to do it if you don't like it. Okay. But what I'm suggesting here, or what we're suggesting here, is that no, we have to do away with this conception of the curriculum. We should actually reconceptualize the curriculum as the total student learning experience. Once that was reconceptualized, immediately we feel that the space for exploration was widened a whole lot. In other words, we're asking questions about the learning environment. What constitutes the learning environment? Anything that happens within this learning environment is part of the curriculum. So when we talk about the learning commons, for example, we have just completed a 6,000 square meter learning commons for the students. We're saying this in the way we design this learning commons, it's actually part of what is being learned, that there is this relationship there. So if you talk about, if you structure it in such a way that it's not conducive to collaborative learning, then you are actually at odds with what we are advocating in the curriculum. So in the Learning Commons, we've built in a lot of space for collaborative learning to enable students to interact socially after class. The collaborative classrooms are built. So here, in doing this, we have meetings after meetings with the estates office, the architects, as well as the teachers. And we have 2 committees, both of which were chaired by academic staff. Flexible classrooms. The library, for example, the librarian was just as much engaged in the process as academic staff as well. So the library, there's one whole floor which was reconstituted, and there was a lot of space for informal discussion within the library. So that's the learning environment. The second dimension of the curriculum is the curriculum structure. So this, if we were to look at the early specialization, a student comes in to specialize in physics, and they just progress through the 4 years. And what we do here is that we're saying, okay, it should be flexible. Students should be able to cross faculty boundaries, disciplinary boundaries, and they can all sorts of different combinations. The third aspect of this, for those of us who are from American universities, this might be something that you've been doing for years, but in our university, academic advising is actually not part of the infrastructure. So if we open up the curriculum and we have that flexibility, then academic advising becomes very important. And here we're engaged in trying to understand academic advising is actually part of our teaching job. And that actually took a lot of discussion and persuasion. We've also run a lot of training workshops because our own academic staff does the academic advising. We do not actually give it to academic advisors, and we have to say this is part of teaching. So the learning journey of our students is as much the responsibility of academic staff and teachers as well as academic advisors. So the goals is to help students to transition to university education, setting goals, selecting courses, and maximizing learning opportunities. And we've adopted a advising redundancy, so each student is mandatory, must have an academic advisor, and these are their professors. They have peer advisors, which are optional. They also have residential advisors, which is compulsory for all residential halls. So that's the academic advising part. But what about the induction of students from secondary education into university? This is where we spend a lot of time doing, and I'm just going to focus on a very important component in our curriculum, where the aim is to get students to ask questions instead of looking for right and wrong answers, to see things from different perspectives, and to see things from being connected. And I quoted this for reference in our framework. That this is a quotation from Mark Van Doren. In terms of curriculum, we allocated 36 credits out of 240 credits to Common Core curriculum, which are 6 credit courses, where it's newly designed courses focusing on issues of profound significance to human society. And the aim is to get students to ask questions, critical intellectual inquiry, exploration, seeing things from different perspectives. What is very important is the core values in these in these courses. So we have organized it according to 4 areas of inquiry, but all the time we're saying that it doesn't mean that these are discrete areas, but rather they are actually interrelated. So for each theme, for each area of inquiry, we have about 4 or 5 themes. For each theme, we have a list of issues that the teacher, if he or she wants to offer a course, must address these issues, and they were asked to indicate what issues are you trying to address in these courses. So, for example, a course called Feeding the World, looking at food. Here is an associate professor in the science faculty looking at where food comes from, and also the human and environmental cost of providing food, and is again crossing the disciplinary boundaries and asking very important questions about food production. So in coming up with this part of the curriculum, all faculties were invited to submit courses. We need about 170 odd courses, which we do, and that is the spread across faculties. These are not introductory courses. It's not a distribution model. These are all newly designed courses, and that is the spread of the profile of the staff teaching on these courses. The second component that I want to talk about is experiential learning. And I say from peripheral to central. This is very much work in progress. It's something that I personally am trying to gain more and more understanding about. This is the investigation of issues in real-life context. It used to be peripheral because it's non-credit bearing, it's optional. But now we're saying that this is absolutely crucial. It must be at the center of the curriculum. And I think that 5-10 years down the road, this should be the major part of our curriculum, and that is we try to learn to gain an understanding of what we are learning in real-life context. I just want to show this quotation from a Chinese philosopher talking about the dialectics of knowing and doing, that you know something, you don't act on it, your knowledge is superficial. But when you have personally experienced it, you see things from a different light. And there's also, John Dewey has been saying about the same thing, and it's also the social theory of learning from Jean Leif and Wenger's work as well. So, why is experiential learning so central? It is because by looking at what faculties have been doing with their students, what I found was that it's a very good embodiment of knowledge, skills, disposition, and values. If we ask, how do we cultivate dispositions and values? This is where it happens. Because the characteristics of real life environments is that the situations are often unfamiliar, the problems are not well defined, contextual factors are absolutely critical, and there is no perfect solution. You have to learn to live with dilemmas. And the skills and dispositions cultivated are adaptability, thinking on your own feet, empathy, understanding the people who you want to do things for. You have to have the passion there. You have to be resourceful, particularly when you work in adverse conditions. You have to be resourceful. You have to be imaginative. And you have to make decisions. And these decisions must be well informed and also driven by core values. Let me just give you, I will run very quickly through the examples. This is Sichuan after the earthquake. And the civil engineering professors and students went to this site and they said, can you please help us to rebuild a kindergarten which collapsed? So the students were engaged in designing, drawing up the design and so forth. They have to interact with the residents there, with the parents, to ask them what would they like the new school to be like. They also have to work within the constraints. If you see the picture on your right-hand lower corner, it's actually a school which is situated in a very crowded environment, and there is an earthquake fault line there that they have to build around. That's where creativity comes in. So the design of the building has to be to cater for the need, but also to avoid further damage if the earthquake occurs. So that is the finished building there. And that's the main entrance of the kindergarten. From talking to students, it came across very strongly how students learned about the building codes, about the culture there, about things that they disagree with, about certain values that they disagree with, and they know that as engineers, future engineers, these are bottom lines that they must hold very strongly. For example, corruption is not allowed, okay? And these are things which constantly students are being confronted with. They have already built a dormitory and a primary school in another part of the province. Here is another experiential learning project from the architecture faculty. If you see the picture at the top, that is the old school, and they were asked to rebuild the school. And at the bottom there, that is the new school rebuilt. And the design was to integrate into the environment so that it doesn't, because it's surrounded by paddy fields, so it has to blend into the environment. But if I show you this picture, you will see why it is designed like that. What you see was actually the rooftop of the school, and that's where it's used as a gathering place for the community. And they were saying, if I build a school there, I want the school to provide space to bring the villagers together so that there is coherence in the community. When they actually do this kind of work in these villages, they have to try to understand the culture, try to understand that in these villages, what are the things that they like and don't like. And you will see our students presenting their design to the villagers to see if they like it or not and to incorporate their suggestions. Here is another one from the business consulting practicum, where this is the business students learning how to draw business plans for a social enterprise. And in the course of doing that, they put to test the theories that they have learned in class. And I don't have time to go into the details. But students understand what a social enterprise is and what they can do for them. So just some data to show, the impact of this kind of work. We started that even before 2012, and you will see that there is this improvement in intercultural understanding, global citizenship, and advocacy for the improvement of the human condition. But this is something which now more and more faculties are making it credit-bearing, and I raised a donation to support this kind of work if it is made as credit-bearing. It really set a lot of people thinking about how do you make sure that the kind of work that you're doing in the classroom can actually be practiced in real-life contexts. So what I want to do is just to spend 5 minutes to share the reflections with you. First of all is the shared vision. Having a vision yourself is not enough. I feel that you have to share it with the staff. And that is to see the big picture and to see the need for change. Seeing the big picture is not something that an academic staff member engages in their everyday life. They don't. They just focus on their area of research. So it's very important every now and again to step back and say, let's look at what the big picture is and how we fit in. The second reflection is setting goals. What do we want to achieve? I started off by saying building consensus. And now where I am, I said not building consensus, but building a common discourse and a shared repertoire. Because in a university like ours, and I'm sure in a lot of universities and Scottish universities and other universities, building a consensus is very, very difficult. Okay, so I rest my case. I said, okay, we don't have to have a consensus, but at least can we speak the same language so that we can explore things together? Then it's operationalization and implementation. That for innovation, new ideas is only part of the equation. The execution is just as important. If we talk about participation and ownership, the willingness to live with imperfection is very important, and the readiness to compromise as well. Resource support, of course, is always important. And then the last one is sustaining change. That is the biggest challenge. That unless the innovation is being incorporated in everyday practice as part of the quality assurance and enhancement mechanisms, it will die out. It must also be part of the performance indicators with resource implications. There has to be infrastructure to support and sustain change. Progress must be disseminated. For example, our student survey results were analyzed seriously. It's disseminated. Deans are responsible for looking at these indicators, and they are actually part of the performance indicators in my university. Celebrating and sharing good practices, we have been doing that, and the strategic allocation of resource support. For example, the Common Core curriculum, we actually allocated 41 professoriate staff to teach to implement that curriculum, which is very important because we do not want that to be relegated to junior staff. Okay, so those are my reflections. So what I have talked about looks like this. It's all neat and tidy, but actually behind is this, okay? And also, when we talk about qualities of a leader, this is the image that it generates. But I want to say that this is completely wrong. To be a leader is not a Superman. But rather, I'd like to end this presentation with a story from Jerry Sternin. Some of you might know his work, the Save the Children project in Vietnam. Sternin was asked by the Save the Children, the organization, to go to Vietnam in 1990s when there was an economic embargo on Vietnam, and the children were suffering from malnutrition. And he said, come and do some work for us. You know, look at children under 5. And I want you to solve the problem in 6 months. Otherwise, you get out of Vietnam. And he thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? The first thing that he did was that he said, don't presume that you have the answer. And what he did was that he initiated discussions with the villagers. What he did was that he went around and he said, are there any families where the children, despite this adverse condition, the children are growing are healthy, not suffering from malnutrition? And what he drew on was the concept of positive deviance. That is, people who, despite these conditions, were able to do well. And these are the deviants. He said, there lies the answer. So he looked at it and he interviewed them and watched them. And he found that these are villagers who actually picked up the very tiny shrimps and crabs and snails from the paddy fields, and they put it into the children's, and they mix it with rice. The other thing that they did was that instead of feeding the children twice a day, which is the usual pattern, they feed them 3 or 4 times. And he said, and that's when that's the eureka time that he's got the answer to that. And the lesson that he gave out of this was that, first of all, you actually really have to go there and look at what has been done and what are the solutions that people were able to come up with. And we should use innovative behaviors to shape new thinking and not the other way around. So this, I find, it resonates a lot with my own work at the university in looking at what faculties are able to do very well and to ask. how they did it, why they did it. Experiential learning is exactly that. I looked at it and I said, wow, that is the future. So I'd just like to conclude the presentation with this quotation from Jerry Sternin, who later wrote up his work. And he said, act your way into new ways of thinking and not think your way into new ways of acting. Thank you very much.
We have 5 minutes for some questions. Any questions for Amy? There was so much in there to let it percolate through, and has it generated any queries for you? I'm going to ask you one, Amy, about I was really interested in the experiential learning. So these projects, were these like the engineers and the architects, were these individual professors who started to build this into their way of learning, and how have you started to spread that out? You said you hoped in 10 years' time it would be almost the norm within the university. How are you driving that?
This started with the civil engineering department with 7 or 8 professors. They have been doing that for 10 years. So when I came across what they were doing, they've already done it for 6 or 7 years. And I actually interviewed the professors, I interviewed the teachers and also the students. I actually also went on site. And that was part of the training for engineering the engineering course, but it's optional. It's optional and it's not credit bearing. But I said, that's fantastic. It should be credit bearing. It should become part of your curriculum. That's how it started, and now it is credit bearing. Because once it's credit bearing, it actually sends a signal to the student, it's not optional. It's all part of it. And the second of all is it actually forces them to think about structuring it. In other words, what is it that you want your students to learn? Because if it were optional, it was something which you just picked up, is incidental. But by making it credit bearing, you force them to become much more explicit. For architecture, it's very interesting. It started off with one architecture professor who did it. And then, because it was celebrated so much, he began to think about it. And then he took ownership and then make it into a first-year studio. And it's now credit-bearing. So every first-year student must go through this. And what he's done was he's identified various sites in China. And this is about redeveloping villages. The students actually have to go, and they have to try to understand what the issues are, how the villagers want to redevelop the village, and each student has, he splits them up into 5 groups, and each group has to come up with a proposal. They have to present it to the villagers. The villagers have to choose one that they really like, and what I like about this is they actually have to construct it. So it's not like doing an assignment, for that. So an education faculty looked at it and said, we'd like to do something like that for our students, about these schools. Can we not do something for the children? After you've built the schools, we'd like to construct a curriculum for them. So I guess this is how it happened.
And then I suppose rewarding it makes it more explicit that it's important.
Yes, actually the civil engineering guys got an outstanding teaching award for that.
They deserved it. Any other questions for Amy? I can't see. Yes, the back left. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really stimulating talk. I really enjoyed it. Early on in the presentation, you said you'd asked the faculty what they wanted, and you'd asked the employers what they wanted. I was wondering, did you ask the students what they wanted, and
yes.
Did they agree?
Yes, thank you for that. The responses from students are very mixed. Students wanted more opportunities to go outside of the classroom. So the things that they really, really value are experiences in the workplace, overseas experiences. They want to have a lot more opportunities for them to engage in group work. But the students also want less workload. Higher GPAs. I was invited to this open forum, with students about our GPA being too low for them, that you were disadvantaging them. So in this curriculum reform, you must raise our GPA. So these are things that we had a lot of discussion with the students, and finally we came up with something that the students agreed with, the way we sort of recalibrated our GPA.
So everyone was involved. I think we're just have come to the end of the session, so I'm just going to hold it there, but Amy will be here. We can have a chat to her over coffee and over the next couple of days. So I'd just like to thank, on your behalf again, Amy, thank you for a really stimulating and very enjoyable presentation.